Stop believing the rumors, people. No, Ubuntu is not replacing apt with snap. Also, we have a new ransomware out there infecting Linux servers, holding your Linux servers hostage for a $75,000 ransom. Redis Labs is dropping the Commons Clause. The Commons Clause, very controversial. They're dropping that, and they're replacing it with their own new controversial license called the Redis Source Available license. Cybercriminals earn over $3 billion a year from social media platforms, and the Ubuntu icon set is addressing its biggest complaint. The icon set is about to get a little more shapely. These are 5 stories that I will be taking into account. So the first story on the docket tonight is no, Ubuntu is not replacing apt with snap. This rumor, I don't know how it got, well, I know how it got started. We're going to discuss that here in a minute, but I don't know why people actually believed this was actually a real thing. Like when I first stumbled across this people talking about it on, Reddit or what have you, all over the internet, I see articles coming up about it. The first thing I thought of was, wow, that's complete BS. Why would Ubuntu take the best thing about Ubuntu, which is the fact that it's based on Debian and the massive Debian repos with the apt package manager? Why are you going to rip all that out and replace it with snap? And I like snap, I don't mind snap, but there's no way this story was ever remotely believable. But I think a lot of people out there, there's a lot of people out there that for whatever reason have this intense hatred toward Ubuntu and Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu. So when they hear these stories, even if they're completely not believable, and the story was in no way ever believable, there's no way I think any of you people that have, some reasonable sense ever thought this story was believable, but that people took this story and they ran with it, right? That Ubuntu's dropping apt, everything's being replaced with snap packs in the very next version of Ubuntu. No, just stop. So this article comes from It's False, and here the author of this article, he discusses how the rumor got started and why it's just a rumor. So how did it get started? Where there were 2 things that really kind of got this going is there was a post over on Ubuntu's Launchpad site, and you can see a little screenshot here. I wonder if I can actually click on that and zoom in a little bit. It says, replace apt with snap. Yeah, replace apt with snap as default package manager. And you see down here, approver. The approver is Mark Shuttleworth. Now, Mark Shuttleworth had nothing to do with this post, and he didn't approve this or anything. Apparently, anybody can post anything on the Ubuntu Launchpad website, any kind of, request for a blueprint. And they can put anybody as an approver. So this guy who created this, Kenny, what's the guy's name, put Mark Shuttleworth as an approver. But this is in no way anything official with Ubuntu. They're not actually replacing apt with snap. Mark Shuttleworth didn't approve this. I don't even know if Mark Shuttleworth actually read this thing. So that is how the rumor got started, is people saw this. They took it as, oh, this is a real thing, right? We're actually going to replace apt with snap. And then the next thing is Switch to Linux, popular Linux YouTube channel, Switch to Linux. I'm subscribed to him. You guys know Tom over at Switch to Linux. Great Linux YouTube channel. He made a video about it. Ubuntu, the end of an era? Question mark. Kind of a clickbaity title, but I like it. I'm not afraid to use clickbait from time to time myself. But again, this I don't know if the story was ever really believable, but Tom, he's a fiery guy. He took this and he created this very fiery video about Ubuntu switching from apt to snap in the next version. He got a lot of people fired up. A lot of people watched that video and they were very fired up about it. So the whole Ubuntu community, or the whole Linux community rather, just kind of blew up over this. Now, the first thing we should discuss, though, the actual post over on the Ubuntu Launchpad site, it's not a bad post. I mean, this somebody's blueprint, replace apt for snap as a default package manager, and they had some interesting suggestions. For example, the post said something like, quote, imagine, for example, being able to run sudo snap install cosmic to upgrade to the current release Cosmic Cuttlefish of Ubuntu. I kind of like that idea. That's not a bad, just sudo snap install distribution version, the code name, or sudo snap install beta disco to upgrade to the beta version of Disco, the next code name for Ubuntu, coming out in March 1904. Or sudo snap install -- edge disco to upgrade to like a pre-beta release, like the alpha release, basically. So that, he had some neat little suggestions. I'm sure there was quite a bit to the post here. But again, this is not, nobody official with Ubuntu, with Canonical, ever really approved this and said, this is a good idea, we're doing this. It's a launchpad site. Anybody can post anything there, basically. And again, just because Mark Shuttleworth's name was kind of attached to the post as an approver, that doesn't mean anything. So the author of this article reached out to Alan Pope over at Canonical. Alan, one of the creators of the Snap Pack format, works for Canonical. You guys know Alan Pope. He's on a lot of YouTube Linux-y channels, hangs out with the Big Daddy Linux crowd sometimes on Saturday nights. He's been on some of my live streams before. Alan's a great guy. Again, he created Snap, so if you want any questions answered about Snap, he's a good guy to talk to, and of course works for Canonical, so he can answer a lot of Ubuntu-related questions. He clarified that the so-called blueprint was not associated with any official Ubuntu team. It was created as a proposal by some community member not affiliated with Ubuntu. So the guy that created the post, he's not a Canonical employee. He's just a community member, and it's just a proposal, just something he thought would be a good thing. Hey, replace apt with Snap. And here's a couple of ways, I would like to see this implemented, blah, blah, blah. So nothing official. Alan went on to state that anybody can create a blueprint. Anybody can tag anybody on it. This guy tagged Mark Shuttleworth. He could have tagged anybody, any Ubuntu member in it. He just happened to pick Mark Shuttleworth's name. So Canonical has no plans to switch apt out with Snap. Apt is going to be there. Snaps are still going to be there, but they're never going to rip out the apt package manager from Ubuntu, at least not anytime soon. 1904, apt will be there, guys. So calm down. Again, it's such a radical change to just rip out the package manager, of a Linux distro. It's not something you just do overnight, like somebody posts something, and 1904 is due out in like a month and a half, like 6 weeks away. So again, when I saw this, my immediate reaction was, again, it's total BS. There's no way that this was ever true. And I don't know how so many people took it, ran with it. People were writing articles about it, making videos about it. And then those people that were watching those videos and reading those articles, so many of you guys believe that. Don't be so gullible, guys. And the second story on the docket involves this new ransomware out there that's infecting Linux servers. It's called Barantok. I'm just guessing here. I'm just spitballing it, but it looks like it might be Barantok. These hackerish spellings with the weird capitalization and sometimes weird characters and stuff. This article comes from Bleeping Computers, written by Lawrence Abrams. And as always, of course, I'm going to have all the articles I discussed today in the show description. So the Barantok ransomware wants $75,000 ransom. So ransomware basically is when a hacker takes over your machine. You can't do anything with your machine. They basically lock down your machine and say, you can't have your machine back until you pay me money. Ransomware is why I switched to Linux, strangely enough. 10 years ago, back in the Windows XP days, I had a situation where my Windows XP, I really wasn't fond of Windows anyway, but I had a machine that was taken over by ransomware. Got some weird piece of malware on the machine that basically took over the machine. You couldn't do anything, couldn't run any kind of antivirus program. You couldn't run any program. All it would do is a pop-up would come up saying, hey, I can fix your machine, but you got to pay me some money. Of course, the person that I'm paying the money to would have been the person that put the crap on the machine anyway. Like, I'm not playing that game. Wiped out the hard drive, I installed Ubuntu, never looked back. I've been on Linux, 10 years now. And that was all because of ransomware. It's because how common that was on Windows. Ransomware was not common at all on Linux. Unfortunately, these days it's becoming more and more common. Unfortunately, something we have to deal with. So this new ransomware is called Barantok, and what it does is it's encrypting the victim's website. So it's basically taking over your Linux web server, it's taking over the machine, and it demands 20 Bitcoin which is currently valued around $75,000. So demanding that as ransom. So if you want your server back, you give me $75,000 and you can have your server back. So again, this article is from Bleeping Computer. They had a forum post where one of their users stated that they had a client's website that was encrypted with this new Barantok ransomware. And we have a post from this guy basically stating, that the client of his got a message and they were basically asked for 20 Bitcoin for the keys to unlock the site. So this guy's website web server was Ubuntu 16.04 LTS. He found an encrypted file on the machine. It had the .rontok extension, so it ended with .rontok. Strange extension. Looks like the Barantok encrypts the file with base 64. It gives a screenshot here. Basically, some of the encrypted data here. Anyway, the file name, by the way, other than having the .rontok extension, usually it'll be like a random string of characters, and it's just going to be gibberish. It's not going to look like anything. And while the user is not able to provide a ransom note, you won't get any message. What it does is it provides a URL. And when you go to that URL, which is at barantok.uk, you will be asked for an ID. You log in, and then you're asked for payment. Once you're asked for payment, it says, of course, the ransom demand is 20 Bitcoins, but it's not firm. You know what? Not everybody has $75,000 worth of Bitcoins just laying around. Well, it looks like the hackers are willing to negotiate the price because on the website, it says your files and databases will be destroyed in 3 days. Negotiate? ? And then it gives contact information, a email, info@barantok.uk. I guess you can email the guy and negotiate the price if $75,000 is a little too steep. Somebody had found something in the source code for the payment site, though, that may give a clue about the hacker. If you read the HTML source code, one of the comments at the very top here in the source code says Vietnamese hacker. Now, is that legit? Who would put that, in their source code? I'm a Vietnamese hacker. That's got to be misinformation, disinformation. So whether the hacker is actually Vietnamese or not, you may never get proof of that unless the hacker actually comes forth. Apparently, Bleeping Computer here has tried to contact the author. Since you have a website, barantok.uk, and a email, info@barantok.uk, they have tried to reach out to the hacker to see, what's up. And they mentioned they have not heard back as of yet. I doubt they will. And the third story on the docket tonight is Redis Labs has dropped the Commons clause for a brand new license. The new license is one they created called the Redis Source Available License. So we should backtrack just a minute before we get into the current article about their new license. A couple months back, you guys may remember, I think I covered it on an episode of Taking Into Account, but Redis Labs started using what is called the Commons Clause. So they added, the Commons Clause is not a license, but it is an addendum. It's something you attach to a free or open source license you're already using. So Redis Labs, I think they use the BSD license for some of their stuff and the Apache license for some of their stuff, and they attach this Commons Clause onto it. What is the Commons Clause? Well, I don't want to dive too deep into that again, but the Commons Clause is basically this sublicense. It forbids you from selling the software it covers. So right away, that should tell you it's not in any way free or open source. It also states you can't host or offer consulting, support services as a product or service whose value derives entirely, substantially from the functionality of software, yada, yada, yada. You can't make any kind of money off of our software. The only way you can do that is first you need to pay us some money. Basically, if you pay them enough money, then, we'll let you modify the code, change the code, sell the code, do whatever. But it was all basically a money grab by Redis Labs. They attached this Commons Clause to it. Immediately, the Open Source Initiative, which is the organization that basically referees these kinds of things, that says, hey, this license is open source, this license it's not. They made a ruling pretty quickly. The Commons Clause is in no way open source. It doesn't matter if the original license, such as the Apache license, which is definitely an open source license, if you add that commons clause to it, which the commons clause is a sublicense to it, immediately your license is no longer open source, your project is no longer open source, and the open source initiative asks the Redis Labs guys, hey, you're no longer open source, stop mentioning open source, don't mention it on your website, stop calling your stuff open source. And to Redis Labs' credit, they did that. They came out and said, yeah, you're right. Our license is definitely not open source anymore. We don't want to be open source. But it still caused a lot of confusion because, again, a lot of their stuff was using licenses like the BSD license, the Apache license, to very free licenses, very liberal licenses, especially the BSD license. It only has like 3 lines to it. The Apache license also is very, quote, free as far as a license. So Redis has decided to quit using something like the Apache license with the commons clause attached to it because it was confusing. They admit it caused confusion. People were still thinking, it's open source? Is it not open source? You know what? We're going to create our own license, basically stating the same thing of the commons clause, but we're going to name it in such a way it's obvious that this is not an open source license. So they created a new license called the Redis Source Available License. So source available is not open source. Usually if somebody mentions something is source available, that means the source code is out there, you can look at it, but it's not open source, because open source implies I can take the code, distribute the code, modify the code, sell the code. You can't do that, right? The source code is out there. You just can't do anything with it. That's source available. And that is what the Redis Source Available license basically is. It's not an open source license. So for those of you that use Redis, the Redis modules that are covered by this current Redis Source Available license are Redis Search, Redis Graph, Redis JSON, Redis ML, and Redis Bloom. But Redis itself remains under the BSD license. It's just those modules that are under the more restrictive source available license. But, you know, Redis itself is still technically free software. It's still out there under the BSD license. Much like the commons clause, the Redis source available license forbids you from using any application built with those restricted modules in a database, in a caching engine, in a stream processing engine, in a search engine, an indexing engine, machine learning or artificial intelligence serving engines. So again, it's very restricted. You really can't do much with those restricted, source available licensed products. You definitely can't do anything to make money. You can't profit from using those. Redis states that the commons clause initially and now the Redis source available license were designed mainly for them it wasn't designed to target developers. It was designed really to combat the cloud companies which, quote, use their monopoly power to adopt any successful open source projects without contributing anything to it. So they're talking about things like Amazon, AWS, making money off Redis software without ever having contributed anything to it. They're making a lot of money off Redis. Redis itself is not making much money. So that is why they're kind of going to this not quite open source model. One of the big criticisms from the Commons Clause and from now this Redis source available license is Gordon Half, who works for Red Hat. He is quoted here in the article, quote, "A lot of the heat around licenses like the Commons Clause come about because companies involved seem to be, on one hand, trying to gain the perceived value of a proprietary license while also getting credit for still being, quote, open source. Open core arguably plays the same parlor trick." So he is absolutely right. It's like you're trying to be slippery here. And you're like, we're kind of open source, but really we want to be proprietary. And no, you can't ride the fence on this. You're either free and open source software or you're not. Or white. This is a white-black kind of thing, right? It's a left-right kind of thing. There's no middle ground. And Redis was really trying to find a middle ground here where there's not one. And the fourth story on the docket tonight. Cybercriminals earn over $3 billion a year from social platforms. So I've railed against social media in general a lot on my YouTube channel. You guys know I'm not a fan of social media. I definitely hate Facebook, always have. Never wanted a Facebook account. Want nothing to do with Facebook. Same with Twitter. In many ways, Twitter is kind of worse than Facebook. Not worse on privacy and security, but worse on the negative, harmful impact of Twitter, because it's basically just this giant hate machine. But social media in general is just bad. It's bad for your health, and apparently it could be bad for your safety, because again, cybercriminals are out there and they're making a killing on social media platforms. So this article comes from Beta News. It's written by Ian Barker. So there was a recent study that cybercrimes are generating, social media-enabled cybercrimes are generating at least $3.25 billion in global revenue annually, at least according to a new report released by a security company called Bromium. And if the numbers from this study are true, I would say this is really becoming like epidemic kind of proportions. Because the findings of this report, social media and the crimes related from social media have grown more than 300-fold between the years 2015 and 2017 in the US. That's crazy. Social media-enabled crime quadrupled between 2013 and 2018 in the UK, and 1 in 5 organizations have been infected with malware distributed via social media, according to the report. I can believe that. I know, of course, I'm not on Facebook, but all my friends and family are on Facebook, and so many of their Windows machines are infected with all kinds of crap. What do these people do all day? Well, they don't do much. Many people, the only thing they do is hang out on Facebook all day. So you know, a lot of this crap that they're getting on their machines, they're probably getting from places like Facebook. Beyond that, we know that over 1.3 billion social media accounts had their data compromised within the last 5 years. And between 45 and 50% of the illicit trading of data, stolen data, from 2017 to 2018 could be associated with breaches of social media platforms. So your privacy and security, if you take those things at any kind of real value, if you value your privacy or security at all, you really can't be on social media, at least not the big platforms. You can't be on things like Facebook and Twitter. You just can't. So you got these hackers out there and these scammers out there. They're trying to play you through your social media accounts. According to the CEO of Bromium, quote, hackers are using social media as a Trojan horse. They're targeting employees to gain a convenient backdoor into enterprise high-value assets. So especially you people that are, viewing things like Facebook and Twitter and whatnot at work, your targets, right? They want to get into that machine, that work machine in your enterprise environment, so they can then do whatever it is they want to do to that business. And because of this, of course, most corporations, most business environments, they completely ban social media use on their machines. Many of them have their machines so locked down, you really can't get on the internet at all. You definitely can't go to places like Facebook and Twitter. Of course, one of the big increases in cyber crime, especially malware, is crypto mining. You guys know this. Every week I have a new story about some, especially on Linux, malware, and it all revolves around crypto mining, right? In fact, that story I did earlier about Linux servers being held hostage for ransomware, and the guy wanted to be paid in bitcoins, right? Of course, he's doing that because if you're paid in bitcoins, it's anonymous, but so much of the crap that goes on, so much of the negative stories involving Linux security, especially here in the last year, involve cryptocurrency and crypto mining. People wanting to take over your machines, to take over your CPU or your GPU, your system resources, so they can mine for Bitcoin or whatever without you knowing. They want to do it subtle, so you don't really know that they're slowly siphoning off some of your system resources to mine for Bitcoin. So since 2017, there has been a 400 to 600% increase in the amount of crypto mining malware being detected globally, the vast majority of which has been found, surprisingly, on social media platforms. So I guess Bromium created a top 20 list of the websites that host crypto mining software, the 20 biggest websites out there that you can find crypto mining software and be infected with. 11 of them are social media platforms, the biggest of which are Twitter and Facebook, and various apps associated with those platforms. How do you get infected with this stuff? Well, the obvious one I just mentioned, apps. You shouldn't be installing any kind of app on any machine or any device unless you really trust the person behind that. It's almost like these days, if you're not vetting the code, you really have no idea, so just don't install anything on your system unless you really need it and you really trust the source that you're getting that program from. So you got to be careful of advertisements. You got to be careful of links. Don't just click on any link, especially when you're on a social media network. According to Dr. McGuire from Bromium, Facebook Messenger has been instrumental in spreading crypto mining strains. So Facebook Messenger is out there just spreading all of this around. Also, just throwing this out there because it's mentioned in the article, be careful on YouTube. Be careful with YouTube apps. And of course, it's not all about, spreading all these hacking tools and crypto mining scams and things like that on the internet. A lot of the crime that takes place on social media sites, of course, is more traditional crime. You guys, I'm sure you've seen a million, like adult escort prostitution posts on social media. And let's not forget, a lot of narcotic stuff can go on in some of these social media sites as well. And the fifth and final story on the docket tonight is the news that the Ubuntu icon set is going to see some changes soon, some pretty big changes. The icon set is addressing what has long been one of its biggest complaints, is the shape of the icon. So designers are going to start embracing new shapes with a new fork of this popular icon set. So an experimental fork of the Yaru icon theme. The Yaru icon set is Ubuntu's official icon set. They're going to start getting away from what used to be called the squircle frame, which is really the square frame, slightly rounded. They called it squircle. They're going to start getting rid of that. Originally, the hope was to create a completely uniform icon set where every icon had the squircle frame. It never worked out right. You were never going to build this massive icon set for every app known demand with that shape. So now the aim is to see if they can maybe create a new blend of squares, rectangles, circles, different shapes to create a more cohesive experience rather than trying to, force every icon to be in this same squircle kind of template. So a picture, of course, is worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to scroll down here. There's a quick screenshot, and you can see some of what they've got going on here. Of course, you got the squircle, icon sets, but you've got some other stuff that does not adhere to the squircle template at all. One of the problems with building a cohesive icon set is the fact that there's so many programs out there that you need to make an icon for. And for big programs, especially ones that have a big branding, things like Firefox, for example, or Chrome, or what have you. The app icon is really part of the branding, and a lot of times they want to create their own icon to put out there on your machine. They don't want that being overridden by, some upstream project. So that can sometimes be a problem of creating, again, this uniform kind of icon set. It looks like the new approach they're going to go with is they're going to have 4 basic shapes. So the shapes that they're going to go with are a round circle, a square, a vertical rectangle, and a horizontal rectangle. What determines the shape that they go with for a particular icon? Well, it depends on the style of that icon, the original design purpose of that icon, but it also depends on the file MIME type. That's interesting. Just off the top of my head, for example, when you think of like icons for LibreOffice, for document icons, such as a spreadsheet or LibreOffice Writer document, what do you traditionally think of? You think of a vertical rectangle, for those document icons. So that's probably what they would go with for that, because traditionally it makes sense. When you think of icons for file folders, they're traditionally horizontal rectangles, right? Now, I'm sure that's probably what they're going to stick with, and vice versa, or the same thing with things that traditionally are square icons and circle icons. So again, 4 new shapes. It's going to depend on the file MIME type for the most part. I kind of like what they're doing as far as the screenshots I've already seen. I don't use Ubuntu as far as distribution, but I do kind of like the Yaru icon set when I take a look at Ubuntu, every 6 months when they get a new release. I actually find the Ubuntu icon set pretty attractive. And that was the 5th and final story on the docket tonight. So this was taking into account episode 31. I try to release a new episode of Taking Into Account every Thursday. Look for episode 32 of Taking Into Account sometime next Thursday. As always, I like to end these by reading a viewer question or comment. So I got an email the other day. Very simple, straight to the point email. Hi, how are you? I just want to know which one is more minimalist, in your opinion, Arch or Gentoo? Thanks in advance. Pretty straightforward question. Minimalist, well, it kind of depends on what you're asking here as far as minimalism. If you're asking, I want to build the system to my specs with all my programs, I want nothing on that machine other than what I put on it, either Arch or Gentoo would be just fine. But if you're really wanting to save on like disk space, Arch, of course, is a binary distribution, and typically their binaries have everything. Like the Arch kernel is the big kernel. It's got all the modules and everything in it, where on something like Gentoo, using portage and using use flags, you're building all the programs on your system yourself. Of course, you're compiling them. So in that aspect, Gentoo would be a more minimal approach than Arch. For most users, though, it probably wouldn't matter. For most users, when they think of minimal, they're thinking as few programs installed on the system as possible. If that's your line of thinking, Arch, Gentoo, really doesn't matter. You can be as minimal as you want with either one. If you're trying to save on disk space, if you're trying to, you don't want any program on your system compiled with anything other than the flags you give it, then obviously Gentoo is going to be the better way to go. Of course, the downside to that is you're compiling everything, you're building everything from source. Before I go, this show was made possible by Anselm, Carlos, Chris, Douglas, Dylan, Leo, Rob, Robert, and Tony. They are the producers of this show. My highest tiered patrons over on Patreon. This show would not be possible without each and every one of those guys. Also brought to you by, you see all those names on the screen, the supporters of the channel. If you'd like to support my channel, please consider doing so. You'll find me at DistroTube over on Patreon. Alright guys, peace.